my main man there, y'all. That's my main man. All right, we're going to start with ordinance number 833-2024. Directors Martin and O'Keefe, come on up. Emergency ordinance authorizing Director of Building and Housing on behalf of the Office of Sustainability to apply for and accept a sub-grant or sub-award from the University of Cincinnati for the Resilient and Efficient Codes Implementation Grant, otherwise known as the Building Performance Standards Grant. Authorized Director to employ one or more professional consultants, computer software developers, or vendors to acquire software licenses and develop software to implement the grant, and to enter into various written standard purchase and requirement contracts needed to implement the grant. Directors Martin O'Toole and O'Keefe. All right. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Now, this isn't an hour, is it?
Director O'Keefe is going to take us through a PowerPoint presentation on this, and then we can chat.
Right.
You do also have an executive summary. Thank you. Good morning to the chair and council members. You have an executive summary on your tablet that if you go to the second part, basically we would receive $100,000 in year. Right now we're in the beginning stages of this grant. We don't have any costs. Mayor's Office of Sustainability is supporting with peer-to-peer city interaction and with community-based organizations. We'll go through that in the PowerPoint slide. But we wanted to come to you for the authorization to apply and accept the $100,000 subaward that we would use next year, and in over a 2-year period to use for things such as the supporting of audit personnel, user-friendly data software, training staff on benchmarking and like small handheld devices for auditing in the field, and with the exact allocation of all of those funds to be determined in this next year. So that's why we're coming to you now. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I do have just an overview of what all of this means and going into a little bit of background. So the reason why I'm here at the table is because this is really an effort to help us achieve our climate action goals. So thinking about building energy targets, this is the Resilient and Efficient Codes Implementation Grant through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So that's where that funding is coming from. Just the lead applicant for this grant is the University of Cincinnati. So I'll be saying RECI, R-E-C-I, is Resilient Energy Code Implementation Grant. So the RECI grant awardee is University of Cincinnati. The City of Cleveland is a subaward of this $100,000, and just wanted to thank Amanda Webb, who works for University of Cincinnati, for leading this effort, along with 3 other cities, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Dayton are also in this cohort. So basically what we're doing as a cohort is we're thinking about building energy use, and here I just have outlined some impacts of building energy use. When buildings, they use a lot of energy. Large buildings that are not efficient use even more energy. Energy use costs money, as we all know. When you use energy, it costs dollars. It also increases climate change through various emissions. Climate change then causes things like high heat days in cities, bigger and stronger storms that cause flooding and damage, and these lead to poor environmental outcomes and conditions and poor health and well-being in our community. So setting energy use targets for buildings that use the most energy would save both building owners and cities money and lead to environmental improvements and community members. So this last bullet is really explaining what a building performance standard is, and we're going to be using that term throughout the rest of the presentation, BPS. This first bullet talks about really tracking buildings. The reason why we know that buildings use a lot of energy is because we currently have tracking of energy through Cleveland 2030 District. Those are voluntary tracking of large building owners who joined and report on a monthly or quarterly basis on their energy use. This slide is showing that really metro areas and large commercial buildings, I don't know if you can see it, but this is basically a broad array of actions you can take on climate in a metropolitan setting. Yesterday we talked a lot about trees, for example. Today we're talking about building energy efficiency, and in large commercial buildings are especially large energy users. So these are, right now we have voluntary building energy reporting, as I said, through Cleveland 2030 District, which is great. So we're tracking. How do we build that into benchmarking from benchmarking into building performance standards, which are targets. I just wanted to show you what's happening nationwide so you have a sense. There are some cities across the United States that have what's called mandatory benchmarking. Here in Cleveland, we have voluntary. So these cities, if you see in this map here, are mandatory benchmarking and disclosure. So building owners have energy targets, benchmarks, and then they disclose them publicly so everybody can see. 13 of these jurisdictions have actually gone beyond benchmarking into building performance standards, which they have energy use targets. They've worked with building owners, and they've worked with data to establish targets, energy use targets, and a building performance standard as a strategy to meet climate goals. So when you have a standard and you have targets, you can start to achieve better energy efficiency, attract funding and investment to reduce energy use in your buildings, and that helps with climate change, environmental conditions, and health and well-being. This is kind of where we are right here in the city of Cleveland. Cities and towns have committed to advancing building portfolio standards. So they're at benchmarking, they're interested in building portfolio standards, and we're in the process of determining what those could look like in Ohio for these four large cities. Very specifically in Ohio, what we're looking at here is we want to develop and pilot a building performance standard. So this is, again, a policy for existing buildings with energy use targets. We would do this based on data, peer-to-peer learning with other cities. We want to design this building portfolio standard to improve energy equity. This is a key piece of our grant proposal. Some building performance standards address every single building, small, medium, large, doesn't matter. That is not necessarily equitable because of the different building owners, different resources for those building owners, and also the amount of energy that's used by different buildings. This project seeks to see how we can more equitably target building efficiency standards, building efficiency targets, thinking about what are the largest buildings, what are the most inefficient buildings, and those will get most bang for our buck. So the final bullet here is reducing implementation costs for both the city and building owners. When we have a standard that addresses every single building, no matter what its size or energy use, that becomes an administrative burden, and it becomes very expensive and hard for every single building owner to implement. Instead, we would look for specific types of buildings, and that would be, again, more reducing implementation costs for city and building owners. Just an overview of how this is working in Ohio. Some of our partners right now, you'll see the 4 cities outlined here: Cleveland, Dayton, Columbus, and Cincinnati. We're working with technical experts such as Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and we are working with the Cleveland 2030 District. Those are building owners. And then we'd also be working with community-based organizations, for example, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. Right now, as I mentioned, we are here. It's a little bit hard to see. We're in the benchmarking phase. We're leading really about when this got established, Cleveland 2030, voluntary. And the timeline is really, we have 6 to 10% cost savings when you're benchmarking. But when you have a building portfolio standard, you can realize, building owners and cities can realize up to 25 to 45% in cost savings here. So this is what we would be doing with the $100,000. We'd be working to build on current benchmarking through Cleveland 2030, apply to existing buildings with large energy usage, require existing buildings to meet energy use and performance targets, and empower Cleveland to accomplish goals on reducing climate change and its negative impacts to the environment and to our communities. We are currently updating our Cleveland Climate Action Plan, and we have now science-based targets. Building energy use, we have found, is a large share of those emissions. Very specifically, this $100,000 would be for a part-time personnel support in the Building and Housing Department. As I mentioned, Office of Sustainability is currently supporting this. This is no cost. That's part of our role. Then the actions that we would take are collecting, analyzing, and learning about what it means to have this kind of building portfolio standard, cost optimal and equitable, and then conduct outreach and develop a plan over the next year with this peer group of 3 other Ohio cities and peer-to-peer support and those technical advisors and assistants that I mentioned. And then finally to implement this cost optimal, equitable building portfolio standard and to track compliance. we wouldn't just put it out there without support for building owners. I think that's really important for us to note. We want to make sure that this is successful and that building owners can actually achieve the targets that we have and that benefits all of us, the city, building owners, and our community. So we would provide support, education, and training for building owners in each city. The next thing on the horizon would be, while this is a planning grant and figuring out the piloting of such a building portfolio standard, there's Reiki 2, so Resilient and Efficient Code Implementation Part 2. $10 million was just announced as the Part 2 to this award. I think the city of Cincinnati actually led that part, and that will be for the implementation support. So this will establish a hub for our 4 cities who are already involved in Phase 1 to have building owners, cities, to access these kinds of resources. So it's already being a part of this has already helped achieve that additional support. And so this is my final slide. The key points really is that we have the opportunity to continue to lead by example. We were recognized way back in 2013 for having one of the first climate action plans as a city, for our update in 2018 and our current update in 2024. And we want to build on our current building benchmarking that's already in place, pilot, adopt, and implement an efficient and equitable building portfolio standard. And then this funding, this implementation program will really enable this not only for Cleveland, but for 3 other large cities in Ohio. That $100,000 will be to support this pilot effort specifically. And I'll say, you could take any questions that you have.
All right. Anything from you, Director?
I think and to the chair, it's pretty sobering to see how, we're not leading this effort. We're coming from behind. And I think we owe it to these climate action goals, being a green city on a blue lake, to jump to this and really start putting some effort into it. And I'm so pleased that we were able to get this sub-grant. It's wonderful. And I think it's going to help bring us ahead. We all see the effect of climate change right outside our door.
Absolutely. Thank you. Seems pretty straightforward. Just a few questions. The grant period, is it just one shot in the arm of $100,000, or is it over a year or 2 years?
I'm sure I can answer that. So it would start in July of 2025, and it's across 2 years. Depending on the planning of this year, it would have the opportunity to potentially accelerate and spend everything in year 2, but we have from 25 to 26, and then 26 to 27 to spend that $100,000 very specifically.
Got it. And there's no other cost to the city. We're not adding any money to this. It's just the accepting the award from the University of Cincinnati of the $100,000 to use to do the work that you've outlined. Correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Got it. You plan to hire someone, what you mentioned. Is that going to be someone internally? You're going to just kind of shift their role and use this money to pay that staff person? Or you're going to bring someone from the outside to hire them?
So to the chair, that is to be determined, and it would be a part-time position if we hired internally, or it could be contracted out.
Got
A
it.
consulting.
Okay. Engagement with building owners. You said you require existing business owners to meet these energy standards. I want us to be clear on what requiring, as you laid out here, and how we intend to engage and work with these current business owners, because what we don't want is to have any adverse impacts, right? And then we go backwards, or people begin to pull up and leave, or whatever the case. But don't think that's the case. But we want to make sure that we are clearly working with building owners, small and large, and around our city, to ensure that their voices are a part of this process as well. In addition to council members as well, who may have an interest in the whole energy pieces here. So when you begin this process, please, keep us abreast of what that looks like, and your engagement plan with the current existing business owners. All right.
Certainly.
And we also, I'm going to add a reporting requirement in here from you all, semi-annual reporting requirement over the periods of the 2 years, to ensure that council is up to date on what's happening along the way. Okay. All right. We'll go to the committee for questions. Councilwoman Santana.
Just on that point, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the chair to Chief, have you guys already applied?
So through the chair to the councilwoman, we joined an application as a potential sub-awardee, and we've been working with the University of Cincinnati through this no-cost period. So this $100,000 subaward is not eligible for us to accept until year 2.
Got it. Okay, so, I mean, essentially, we don't know if we receive this 100,000, right? Or is it like guaranteed?
Through the
Yes,
chair,
I'm a little
it's
confused.
allocated to Cleveland currently.
Okay.
We just
so-
needed to come and have authorization to accept it.
And is that the max that we could have applied for?
Yes, through
100,000? Okay.
the chair, yes.
Got
That
it.
is
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
Councilman Harsh.
Thank you. Through the chair. I dropped my pen. Through the chair, I dropped my pen. On page 12 of the presentation, where you have the reduction goals, through the chair to, I believe, Director O'Toole. I'm sorry, Director O'Keefe. Those are here. Who tracks the data on our emission reduction progress?
So through the chair, our Mayor's Office of Sustainability Decarbonization Strategist and team track the data on our greenhouse gas emissions for the city, for not just city operations, but for the wider city. So we get reports and we work with technical experts to measure those greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay. And through the chair, then, do they just measure it in the air for particulate matter, or are they compiling data on energy use rates for buildings and how much,
Yeah, through the chair, we compile data based on energy usage. That's correct, energy use data. And I'm happy to share that report with you if you'd like to see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I see on this page that you say we've got 18% emission reduction as of 2021, which puts us slightly ahead of the 16% goal of 2020. And is there, through the chair, is there any concern that we will not hit the 40% benchmark in another, 6 years? Or does that seem achievable, or how do you think we're doing?
Yeah, so through the chair to the councilman, we are slightly behind on being able to achieve that goal currently. We're also updating our goals to be more in alignment. Right now, these goals, as stated here, are not in alignment with global goals in the Paris Agreement. So we are updating those to be what are called science-based targets. And we, with initiatives such as this, the Building Portfolio Standard, and the other ones that I put on this slide right here, these kinds of things, thinking about on-site renewables and waste reduction, mass transit, which we're all working on all of these efforts together, will help us achieve those goals in
Alright.
concert.
That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we're not in the implementation phase yet, but just curious to ask through the chair. So ultimately, would this become something that's enforceable? Is the goal for this to be, if you're not meeting the standard, there would be some consequence to that? And then also curious about, typically, are there incentives offered? So if, let's say, going forward, we enter the implementation phase, I'm guessing a lot of these building upgrades or retrofits would not be inexpensive. Typically, looking at best practices from other cities, are incentives offered to help building owners make the necessary improvements? Through the chair.
Yeah, through the chair to the councilwoman, yes. So the advantage of having targets is that, first of all, benchmarking, you know where you are, you have a baseline. But the advantage of having targets is that together with building owners, the city and other community-based organizations can work together to attract funding to help achieve those targets. So when you talk about incentives and enforcement and compliance, what cities have typically done or other jurisdictions have done is they've started planning together and said, okay, these are the targets, let's do voluntary, let's do incentives, and then they phase it and become more aggressive, I guess I could say, on the enforcement of it. So we wouldn't want to start off saying, here are some standards you need to comply. That doesn't help anybody. So what we want to do is, part of the engagement of business owners is to develop, as I said, we have voluntary business, large building owners already voluntarily doing that benchmarking. So that would be a great group that's already involved to think about how, get their input on how it would make sense for large building owners from that perspective. What kind of incentives would they be interested in? How can we help large building owners achieve these targets? If we can't help them achieve them, then there's not a lot of point in putting it out there.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question. Typically, is it municipal government that ultimately leads the charge and coordinates, or is it sounds like there's a little bit of a collaborative approach? Through the chair.
Yes, through the chair. In this case, there are 4 municipalities that are working together, and it definitely depends. Energy policy and codes differ from state to state. So the the benefit with working with 3 other large cities in Ohio is that we have the same, I'll say, energy at the state level policy and code situations, so that way we can learn from one another. But ultimately, in Cleveland, we would have, the jurisdiction would be the Cleveland, the city of Cleveland and city of, with your support.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any further questions?
Oh, okay.
Councilman Joe Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, congratulations on being able to get the funding to deal with such a critical issue. And I believe being responsible as government to, which is long overdue, should have been something that we should have been working on in the 70s. Given the fact of the impact of what's happening globally and what's happening across the United States of America in terms of global warming. Looking at some of what you have here in the presentation, my questions would be, and I know that you don't have, I presume, a set of goals yet, or do you have a set of goals or targets as relates to where we have some of the biggest emissions coming from?
Through the chair to the councilman, we have very high-level goals on energy use in Cleveland and how to, we want to reduce it, but lots of things can go into that. So this effort would be to further define what goals would apply to large buildings, for example, versus small buildings.
Can you give us an example?
An example of through the chair, an example of a goal that
Correct.
might make sense. So I don't have it. I can send that a little bit later. But for example, I can talk about Columbus. So Columbus right now has a benchmarking. We have voluntary benchmarking in Cleveland for large building owners. You can join if you want. Cleveland 2030 district. Columbus has passed a mandatory benchmarking, and they have found, I believe, that large commercial buildings are the largest contributor to energy use. Are the largest energy users. I guess it makes sense. Large buildings use a lot of energy. And so they're working with them to track that. So I don't have specific goals, but I can send those to you.
So, and part of this, just to make sure I'm on the same page, is dealing with building and housing with the buildings as it relates to the emissions that they give out. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
So that's part of it. Is there a bigger plan to not just focus on buildings alone?
I can take that one. So on this slide number, I don't have the slide number, but this map right here, it kind of gives a high-level view of different size cities, for example, towns versus large metropolitan areas versus small urban areas. And today's presentation is really focused, and legislation is focused on building energy efficiency. But for example, like yesterday, we talked about the ability of trees to be planted, not necessarily reduce energy emissions, but to help because they cool areas, right? So that helps with energy usage. Another, in other conversations with the City Council, we've talked about on-site renewables, for example, biodiversity, nature-based solutions, and reduction of waste. So those are many different strategies that will help across the board on addressing global warming, climate change, and environmental conditions.
Right. So it's just in general, but you really don't, I mean, you have an idea of where you want to look at it. It's just establishing how you do it, how you suggest to the various different people who would be a part of the program, what they should do to hopefully reduce emissions. So if I'm a big building owner, say I'm BP America, for an example, I'm just trying to get an idea of what you would be saying to me to help me reduce my emissions. What would you say to someone like me if I have BP America building?
Sure. Through the chair to the councilman, we work very closely right now in our update to our Cleveland Climate Action Plan. We have a number of working groups. One is on the built environment. So we've invited large building owners and others to that conversation as we think about what goals and priorities there are, not just large building owners, but small as well. So that's the built environment specifically. We also have a working group called Circular Industry, for example. So we are working with industrial companies here in Cleveland and Greater Cleveland to understand what their current goals are. A number of goals have already been declared by area businesses on climate change. So we're having those conversations right now and drafting those goals into our climate action plan.
Okay, so how does building and housing play a part? are we enforcing whatever standards we put in place? How does that work?
Through the chair to the councilman, building and housing is where the permitting process lives and where the code enforcement process lives. So it does follow that building performance standards would be something that our department would be involved in, especially determining what's workable within the existing Ohio Building Code, looking at that with our other peer cities, and helping to steer that policy.
And then lastly, will we be doing anything with, I know that we get rid of a lot of waste every year. How do we deal with that, with our landfill?
Through the chair, specifically to buildings?
With our landfill, will we
Yeah.
be doing anything with that?
Yeah, so we do have what's called a circular Cleveland roadmap, and we have a senior manager for sustainable, for circular economy, and she's working across lots of different industries, stakeholders, to figure out how to reduce waste. We have that in our municipal action plan, which we're updating as well, how the city operations specifically will also help reduce waste. So just as we're developing goals and targets for the wider community climate action plan, we're doing the same for our own city action plan. And we work very closely with the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District on all of those efforts, as well as other stakeholders who deal with waste.
So this 100,000 is a small amount of money, so is it gonna, how are you gonna utilize this $100,000 to help you?
So the $100,000 will be used to support part-time personnel, either by the building and in building housing or contracted through building and housing, to do a little bit of work over a 2-year period in all the things that we've described. But this already has helped us, just being a part of the first year with no cost, no money, has helped us be included into the second phase, which is $10 million earned in Cincinnati for implementation and support for building owners and cities through a hub.
So your hope is once you add on a part-time person to help do this work, so who is anyone full-time? Do we have a person that will be working on that I could talk to?
We do not, through the chair, we do not currently have a full-time person working on this specific action. Part of this would be to determine what would be needed to implement, and that could be part of the evaluation in the 2 years of this grant.
And then this would hopefully set up to get the $10 million to implement whatever the part-time person says needs to be implemented.
Yes, so whatever we determine then would be that $10 million, we would be a part of, Cleveland would be a part of the hub that is funded by that $10 million.
So do we have an
implement it.
idea? Because all of the $100,000 is going to building the housing for the part-time person. Do we know who that is? Isn't a consultant in this field?
To the chair, it would be somebody who would have expertise
So you don't have
in
them
this
yet?
field. No, we're going to
Okay.
determine that right now. This funding wouldn't be spent until July of '25.
I see.
Yep.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the director, and certainly I look forward with trying to know a little bit more about it, and how it would help us to have a more profound impact on dealing with climate change. And certainly I'm supportive of it, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you,
Councilwoman
Councilman.
Santana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanna do a motion.
Yes.
So first motion would be that Cleveland City Council, we receive a semi-annual report over the grant, period of the grant. And the second would be to cross on page 3, and other funds approved by the Director of
Which
Finance.
section is that?
That is section 8
All right.
on page 3.
There's been a motion. Is there a second? All right. Motion is second. Any discussion?
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Chair to the chief, my assumption here is that when you receive a grant, it goes into an account, and from that account, you would then distribute the contracts. Okay, so it seems like that section, I'm just trying to flesh out yesterday we ran into a situation where the "and other sources" was necessary based on paybacks to utilities, but here it seems like it's not.
Yeah, I don't think it is here. As they say yesterday, they add that in for flexibility if they want to use or spend from other accounts.
Right.
But this one here that's why I asked the question.
Right.
We're adding the other funds, and it's straight from the grant itself. We're not
Right,
looking at
right,
other
okay,
funds.
thank you.
All right. All right. There's been motion and second discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, ayes have it. Seeing no further questions, ordinance number 833 stands approved as amended. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Have a good
come on,
day.
Commissioner. Ordinance number 827-2024 by Councilmembers Harsh, Bishop, Griffin by departmental request. An emergency ordinance authorizing the mayor and the Commissioner of Purchasing Supplies to sell certain city-owned property no longer needed for the city's public use located on the southwest corner of Delora Avenue and Fulton Road to Civic Builders LLC for purposes of residential development. To the committee, this was heard and approved municipal services. Pretty straightforward. So the leftover piece of land, Councilman Harsh is trying to get this house built on that corner there, and we want to make sure that we hear this today. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the legislation would authorize the sale of an excess piece of right-of-way that was left over from the opening of Fulton Road between Biddulph and Pearl back in the 1930s. The land is only 21 feet wide. It's about 2,137 square feet. It will transfer for a appraised value of $3,700. And the land will be used to create a driveway from Fulton Road to the rear of the rear-loaded garage on the house next door, which is a land bank parcel. The builder is in escrow on the land bank parcel currently, so he'll close on that parcel and then consolidate this parcel, the city-owned parcel, with his land bank land, and the house will be built, and I think it's a good project.
All right, Commissioner. We heard a lot about it yesterday. I think it's also a great way to use some excess land that's just kind of sitting there and
Yes.
to allow for another new home to be built in the city of Cleveland. One of the only few in Ward 13, most recent. That's right. That's right. I remember you. Any questions from the committee? No questions? Councilman Hart, you want to add anything?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to have this here today and fully support it.
Yes,
Thanks.
sir. Thank you. Seeing no further questions, ordinance number 827-2024 stands approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. There you go. All right. Come on up. Carl, do you prefer to start with
Go with first, second.
472? Okay.
First Hungarian reform first, please.
First Hungarian first. Okay. Yes.
Good.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good to go? All right. Ordinance number 472-2024 by Council Member Starr, an emergency ordinance designating First Hungarian Reformed Stone Church, a.k.a. Second New Hope Baptist Church, as a Cleveland landmark. We have a presentation up on the screen. It's also on your tablets as well. All right, Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, I'd like to first introduce Kendra Chatburn and Michael McBride from Burton Bell Carr as our guests here today. This is for at 2850 East 79th Street. The history of a place isn't always obvious. Looking at this overhead shot from just a few years ago, it just doesn't tell the story of what used to be here. Opportunity Corridor runs at the north now, and the cold storage plant on the lower left side. However, once upon a time, this was a thriving residential and commercial community. An estimated 1 million Hungarians came to America during the Great Migration between 1870 and 1920. In 1900, there were more than 9,000 Hungarians in Cleveland, and the 1920 census showed that over 42,000 people stated they were born in Hungary. A distinct neighborhood came into being in the mid-1880s. Hungarians settled around Madison Street, now East 79th, and Woodland Avenue from 65th Street onward. Streets with particularly heavy concentrations of Hungarian residents included Bismarck, Rawlings, and Holton. The neighborhood developed near several major factories on the southeast side of Cleveland. So we note here the tremendous growth of the area in just under 2 decades. And Cleveland was the first location of several Hungarian church denominations in North America. First Hungarian Reformed in 1891, St. Elizabeth's Roman Catholic in 1892, and St. John's Greek Catholic Church also in 1892. Originally formed as Trinity Reformed Church and established in 1891, it's the first of all Hungarian congregations in the United States. On May 19th, 1892, their charter was secured. In 1894, the first church building was constructed. In 1896, they merged with the Reformed Church of Hungary. The wooden church was dedicated on November 25th, 1894. With the growth in the neighborhood, a larger church was needed in less than a decade. The wooden church was raised, and here you see the cornerstone laying for the new church. In 1903, the construction began, and in Memorial Day in 1904, the new church was dedicated. And the architect was from Cleveland, Paul Matzinger. He is the architect of numerous churches, apartment buildings, and terraces throughout Cleveland. There are many examples of his buildings as contributing to historic districts or being individually designated. Here is the photo of the dedication of the stone church on Memorial Day. It was great to find these old images of the congregation through the years, because as we've said before, it's not just about the building, it's about the people and in the traditional garb. And it also gives us some hints of potential restoration for the historic photos and stuff we always look for, which is great to see. In 1916, the congregation celebrated its silver anniversary, and they purchased some land, a house on Buckeye and East 123rd, as great numbers were moving up the hill. So we go from lower Buckeye to upper Buckeye. So this transition of them moving up through the house, through the neighborhood. In 1925, they purchased a 1 acre of land at the corner of East Boulevard and Buckeye Road, and construction began on Bethlehem Hall in 1932. Groundbreaking for the new church occurred in 1948, and the dedication of the Grand Church. Grand Church was designated as a Cleveland landmark on March 21st, 1977. With the construction and use of Bethlehem Hall, the stone church was made available for sale. The Second New Hope Baptist Church purchased the older building, and they were formed in about 1924 and known as New Hope Baptist Church, starting in the central neighborhood, and then they would eventually merge with Nariah Baptist Church and become the Second New Hope Baptist Church. November 1943 is when they moved in. During their time here, they made several changes to the property. Steeple was removed, steps, basic stuff. Eventually, here's the church a little bit later. So they changed the window openings as well. In 1987, this building that we're discussing today was originally nominated for landmark designation. And it went through the process, and it was introduced, approved by the Legislation Committee and Planning Commission, but then it was on the agenda for the Finance Committee, which is no longer part of the landmarks designation process. And our records are silent as to why it stopped. And it may have been because of the potential sale and the move that they're going out to a new location. So it was tabled eventually, and so that stopped the process, and it sat for a while. The church was sold in November 1989 to New Community Apostolic Faith Church, and there's very little information about them. Can't find anything on them. So they kind of bought the thing and then let it go into disrepair. Another nomination was attempted in 2002, but no further action was taken. At some point, it was abandoned, and then wound up in the state of Ohio forfeiture in 2017, and then CCLRC in 2018. In 2018, this church came up for potential demolition as part of the Opportunity Corridor project. I had been asked by my colleagues in city planning to go and speak to the local design review committee about this, and it was after a very lengthy discussion, it was put on the table. It was tabled at that point, and Burton Bell Carr at that time, because they had the landowners, agreed to doing some more extensive research and seeing what else can be done. So the hold was for 6 to 8 weeks, but it's turned into much longer, thankfully, and we're here at a much better place. You can see the current owners. In part, they have asked for designation to apply for historic rehabilitation tax credits. The access drive to the north is on a separate parcel, and immediately to the south is an RTA station, which is also undergoing renovations. As a part of the reimagined property for productive use, my colleagues in city planning and I developed a potential concept for the property, which include housing and such. It is currently zoned limited retail as of 2021. And these are some photos from 2019. The conditions of the church haven't changed much since then. There's been some stabilization efforts, temporary roof. There had been some dumping on the property, and the old school building was not properly removed, so there's still some foundation sinking in the bottom. The building generally maintains its integrity with the non-conforming addition, and it is a candidate for removal. There is reuse potential. We see older churches being reused in many ways. Here's an example of a brewery restaurant out in Troy, Ohio. There's many of these throughout, including coffee shops and such. And this is the view from the RTA station. And we feel very strongly that this is an excellent nomination designation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Always a very thorough and a very just detailed presentation. So we thank you for that. I know Councilman Starr is in support of this designation. And we'll open up to the committee for questions. Councilman Joe Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like the chairman said, you're very thorough. These photos are just absolutely outstanding, and the history here is certainly outstanding. I guess my question would be, is the church currently in use now? Based upon the last photos, it seems like it's in disrepair and is breaking down on the inside.
Through the chair, it has not been in use for probably over 20 years.
So it's abandoned right now.
Yes, it is correct.
So I guess my question is, why would we make it a landmark if it's an abandoned building? It's falling apart. No one has it. It will continue to fall apart. Is there any kind of, and don't get me wrong. We have a number of buildings in the city of Cleveland right now that's falling apart, and it takes away from the neighborhood. And though I understand you want to make it a landmark, if doing so here at the table, Mr. Chairman, we don't have an owner. It is abandoned. There's no church that has it right now. What would that mean in terms of its continued blight and negative impact on the neighborhood because there's no ownership, and then there's no money that's going to be put into it? I mean, you couldn't have this church in its existence in any other neighborhood, and you couldn't have it in Palmer, you couldn't have it in Shaker, you couldn't have it nowhere else still existing in a dilapidated state that it is right now. They would tear it down. So can you please tell me why we should, make this a landmark with no improvements or investments that's going to be made here to stabilize it and keep it up? And if it becomes a landmark, I would presume, Mr. Chairman, that would mean that who would come in and rehabilitate it would have to rehabilitate it based upon certain standards. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman, to the distinguished gentleman?
Through the chair, Councilman, to have it designated as a landmark would open it up to additional financial tax credits and other funding sources. The owners are here. Burton Belcar does own this property.
Who owns it?
Burton Belcar.
Okay.
So we are looking at this to, you say there's a blight on the neighborhood. There's basically no neighborhood left.
Right.
So we use our historic landmarks to anchor future development. This is your starting point. This is a gorgeous building that does not need to come down. It is not, you can't get construction like this anymore. This is potentially a national register property because it is the First Congregation. We need to save more of these to help anchor new development. It is not sustainable to keep demolishing these buildings. If we keep losing these buildings, we lose our history entirely. And we have no way to tell that. Everything else goes away here. What was this at one time? This is, I would not say it's unique, but it is one of very few remaining. And they don't show up of this vintage in other cities. This is important for reuse. The first step, this is the first step in long term. We can't just look at right now. We have to see what is, what was, what can be. And this can be something, but we can't have instant gratification all the time. This is going to take long-term planning, and this is the first step of that.
Thanks, Carl. I think the owners want to chime in as well.
Sure. Through the chair to the councilman. So Burton Bell Carr supports this designation, and I appreciate your looking at the pictures and thinking that, you know, it's a blight and it looks kind of abandoned, but it doesn't look great now, but it looks better now than it does in those pictures. We've cleaned up the dumping. We've chained off the access for the people that were dumping there. We've temporarily dried in the building on the roof. I do agree with the Landmarks Commission that it's important to save it. I, for one, get absolutely no instant gratification when historic buildings get knocked down, but in this case, having this designated will allow us to tap into more funding to put together a financing plan to reuse the building. And this building, I think, it's kind of like uniquely situated in that it's a beautiful historic building, but it's also in a kind of a unique location. It's right next to the rapid station, so it's a rapid station that probably if RTA was just running it by the numbers, they would close it because it gets such little use. So part of our role at Burton Bell Carr is to create destinations and reasons for people to get on and off that train there. This has the potential for that. It's also right near the Opportunity Corridor, so you know, despite what everyone thought about the Opportunity Corridor, now I take it a lot, and you can get places fast from that place. I think you can get a lot of places with a short drive time. So this also has the potential to be a destination that serves the neighborhood and can draw people from outside the neighborhood on Opportunity Corridor. We think this designation will help us put together a financing package for that, basically, and then also be a kind of a beacon to the neighborhood. We've got a lot of apartments just south of Kinsman, what used to be the Garden Valley, that's now Heritage View and other named places. And then we also have the new community place up on Woodland that the city supported with a lot of financing for those housing developments. You know, and then Colfax Family Homes just got built around there. So the idea is to keep those developments happening on all the vacant land, but also to provide some kind of link to the past and a building that hopefully, with Burton Bell Carr as the owner, we can direct the development to have something that is, you know, serves the community and also is, you know, financially stable. So there's a lot of benefits out there for doing this, and you know, there's no guarantee, but we're trying to put every little piece together to make this redevelopment happen.
Thank you, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. McBride, because a lot of times, you know, and this is just when you look at the east side of the city of Cleveland and my colleagues who are members of the east side of the city of Cleveland, our landscape has been devastated. Very few investments have been made. There was a study that was brought here at the table from the previous administration that talked about over $14 billion of investments over on the other side of town when they talked about middle neighborhoods and the lack of banks and financial institutions investing into the community. And when you look at some areas of our neighborhood, especially over there near the corridor, it's like someone dropped a bomb over there. And many of you can attest to that. So it's really good to know, because when I first saw you, I thought you was a minister sitting at the table and you were part of trying to revitalize your church. So it's good to see that a development corporation is going to be involved and making this a designation. You're saying to me it will open up the opportunity for you to potentially get economic development to rehabilitate this. And it sounds like you're saying to me that you even put a a roof on the building to stop the onslaught?
Temporary,
of-
but yeah.
It's temporary? So when you say temporary, could you elaborate?
Through the chair to the councilman, basically nailed down blue tarps to stop it from leaking, and but to preserve it.
Okay, so it's good that we're going to do something here with the building, and I hope to. I am impressed with, as always, with the distinguished gentleman who runs the landmarks with his presentations. It's very impressive what the building used to be and the people who are there. Is the Hungarian church or anyone kind of interested in the landmark? Have we done something to reach out to that community to see if they're still interested, or do they still exist, or has it just been dispatched?
Through the chair, the congregation is now located in Walton Hills, and they were the ones that helped gather some of this information from their pictures, but they have not. They have their own church now.
They have no interest in it anymore.
I think they're interested, through the chair, that it's happening and that's nice, but financially or anything like that, being reused as a church probably would not be viable.
Really? Okay. I would think that, that by that being such a historical, piece, that they would want to keep that alive, and to assist in some kind of way. Do you think there may be some interested in this? I guess if we could get them to be more interested in it, to the Development Corporation?
Through the chair to the councilman, there could be. We'll certainly reach out to them. The Hungarian community has a presence in the neighborhood with kind of the mother church, Catholic church, down the street, and so we do have, which is still an active parish. So we can reach out, and we will reach out. I'm sure at least that they would come to the ribbon cutting. I want to also, to the councilman through the chair, I want to mention that, I live on the east side too. I see the same thing you see on the northeast side, and I cringed when I drove down this one street to 156 where there was a designated historic landmark church, and I could just see it falling apart. And thanks to I drove down the other day, I couldn't believe it. It had a new roof on it. It's not going to be demolished. And Carl told me that the Landmarks Commission basically pushed back on demolition, and now that's there. And as a resident who has to drive around there and see things falling apart, and just to me, it was a great victory. And so I think this has the same kind of potential. And I'm not, what you described in terms of the conditions on the east side is certainly not lost on me.
Well, I just want to thank you guys for the work you do in the neighborhood as a development corporation. Really appreciate that, and it's good to know that, at first when the presentation was made, I had no idea. I'm thinking that you just want to make it a landmark and that's it. But it seems like you have further plans, and I'm excited about what that looks like, moving forward. And I'm hoping and praying that you get the resources. Thank you for, because a lot of times illegal dumping is happening throughout our neighborhoods. Just this year long, I've requested for pickup of 125 times dumping in and around my neighborhood. And then a lot of times these are contractors and people coming from other neighborhoods and doing illegal dumps in our communities. And so I really appreciate you cleaning up that dump debris, and I would presume the Development Corporation will continue to keep that area looking as best you could. I would presume that would be your commitment?
Yes. Yeah, and
well, congratulations, Mr. Chairman. I have no unreadiness in terms of supporting this.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Spencer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just one brief question. Great discussion today. I should know the answer to this question, but wanting to ask again. Is the act of designating this a Cleveland landmark then make this eligible to seek historic federal tax credits or state historic tax credits? In other words, is our local designation what's needed to seek the tax credits that would ultimately be necessary for
Good
redevelopment?
question.
And by the way, this is fantastic. So, through the chair.
Through the chair, the local designation would make it eligible for state. It would have to be on the National Register, which should probably be pursued, because then it would make it also, I think just architecture and then its history, I think, would make it eligible for that.
Thank you. So through the chair, at a minimum, our approval of this today would make it eligible for state historic tax credits. Okay, terrific. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's hard to ride, I'm in the same neighborhood, so drive past 156, the stained glass windows, some were removed from it, man. It was just, it really was a holes in the brick in the side of the wall. I just couldn't believe it because that was a beautiful big church right across from where Fanny's used to sit on the corner,
Right.
A long-time restaurant. So I did see that some work had begun on that property and was glad to see that was the case. But that's right outside of my jurisdiction. All right, thank you. See no further questions. Ordinance number 472-2024 stands approved. All right. Moving on, ordinance number 473-2024 by Councilmember Gray, an emergency ordinance designating Second New Hope Baptist Church, formerly St. Margaret of Hungary Catholic Church, as a Cleveland landmark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Michelle Abernathy, who is a member of Second New Hope Baptist Church and who has been helping me through this entire process. So I'm very thankful for her to be here today. Okay. The building is located in Ward 4 on the east side of East 116th Street, just south of Buckeye Road. In 1917, members of St. Elizabeth's Church met to form a Ladies and Men's Sick Benefit and Death Benefit Lodge. The purpose was to form a new church and school on the Upper Buckeye neighborhood. Walking was still the main means of transportation at this time, and the 30 to 45-minute trek to St. Elizabeth's was difficult for some. In 1918, they received permission from the diocese to purchase 9 lots and later the site of the old Newburgh City Hall. Newburgh, as a city, was annexed to the city of Cleveland in 1913. In 1919, the first Mass was held at the chapel of the St. Mary Orphanage. The first wood church and recreation hall was completed in 1922. In the bell tower, they had 2 bells named Elizabeth and Emmerich, which are after the other Hungarian national parishes that were in Cleveland at the time. And then in 1927, the new era began of expansion under new pastor Andrew Kohler, who earned the title Father of all Hungarian immigrants. The old church and the rec hall and rectory all needed repairs, and the ceiling had started to collapse in the church. The architect is Antonio DiNardo, who was an Italian immigrant. He attended the University of Pennsylvania and the Beaux-Arts Institute in Philadelphia. After working in Philadelphia, he moved to New York to work in the office of Arnold Brunner, who was a part of the Cleveland Group Plan Commission. It is noted in the Encyclopedia of Cleveland History that DiNardo, while working for Brunner, designed a building for the north end of the mall, which is possibly the earliest concept of what would become Terminal Tower. DiNardo came to Cleveland in 1921 and worked for the firm Hubble & Bennis before creating his own firm with William Cole, then striking out later on his own. He designed a number of residences, churches, and also the transportation building for the Great Lakes Exposition. His wife, Alida, was an interior decorator. This photo here is from their 1922 passport, and an example of one of his churches down in Barberton. Dedication of the church was on October 26, 1930. The parochial school enrolled 500 students. Over the next 2 decades, the parish would grow, and in 1948, it reached its peak of 4,000 members. Although a new parish house was constructed in 1953, the trend of parishioners moving to the suburbs had already begun. Pastor Kohler retired in 1965, and the old rectory was raised for parking. By 1973, membership was down to 1,700, with about 45% living in the suburbs. School enrollment also declined in the 1970s, and by the late 1980s, membership was down to 329 families. Finally, in 1989, it became time to move. The final Mass on August 13th, or after the final Mass on August 13th, the altar was dismantled, stained glass removed, and the church sold to Second New Hope Baptist Church. St. Margaret reestablished their new church on the grounds of the Divine Redeemer Home in Orange Hills, which was dedicated in September 1993. And then their time here would be short-lived, as St. Margaret of Hungary was one of the 29 parishes ordered to close by June 30th, 2010 by the Cleveland Diocese, and they closed in 2009. Staff was approached about the designation of the building by Abernathy, who noted that the congregation was celebrating 100 years. When I began my research, I found some discrepancies in the information given to me, which raised some additional questions. Since the early church records are silent as to the origins of the congregation, I had to piece some things together based upon any available information. And while there are a number of facts that did line up, the oral history has evolved over time and embellished some others. Earliest reference I could find was for the 24th anniversary of the church, and that this church was organized in October 1924 with the Reverend David Calvert as the first pastor. It was originally a small group of singers known as the New Home Chorus. Additionally, they were originally thought to be at a storefront at East 86th Street and Quincy Avenue, and this is where our information begins to differ. New Hope Baptist Church appears in the 1922 Cleveland City Directories, which would make their start the previous year. No pastor is listed. They also appeared in the 1923 directory, but not in 1924. In 1925, the New Hope Baptist Church reappears in the directory with Reverend Calvert as the pastor at the same address previously listed. To complicate the matters, a New Home Baptist Church was also listed in the directories, only a few blocks away on Orange Avenue. In November 1925, New Hope Baptist Church moved to 5705 Outhwaite Avenue, with Pastor Calvert being the linking information. New Home got a new home on East 55th, but another New Hope Baptist Church is also listed at the old address of the first. Calvert's pastorate ended in 1927, and Reverend Shaw was called for 6 months. When we removed the frame from this picture shown, we found Pastor Shaw's name, which allows us to date it from 1927 to 28. 5705 Outhwaite was built for the First Scandinavian Lutheran Church, dating to 1907. They would sell the building to the Nuash Ari congregation in 1915. Nuash Ari may have rented or shared the building with New Hope Baptist Church from late 1925 through 1929, when they then sold the building to Bethel Missionary Baptist Church on December 5th, 1929, as part of their move out to Warrensville Center area. New Hope Baptist Church struggled without a pastor in 1929. However, later that year, they merged with Nariah Baptist Church. A small congregation had just been organized. And in 1930, they were listed in the city directory as Second New Hope Baptist Church. Reverend Lloyd Mitchell was the pastor of Nariah at the merger, but had left by 1932, and Reverend Percy Herod began. During Herod's pastorate, the congregation moved to East 63rd Street to a converted barn. Reverend Jordan Allen became the stabilizing force for the congregation in September 1936. And under his leadership, Second New Hope started banking money collected on the third Sunday of the month for a new church. In 1940, they were able to purchase a piece of property on Woodland Avenue with the intent of building new. However, plans changed when a property on East 79th Street came on the market in 1943. The First Hungarian Reformed Church was moving to and constructing their new church in the Upper Buckeye neighborhood. Asking price was $24,000, or about $431,000 today. On November 7th, the congregation marched from East 63rd Street to their new home, and 1 year later, the mortgage was burned. For nearly 50 years, this would be their home. Pastor Allen served the church until his passing in 1975. In 1976, Reverend George Quincy Brown was called to be pastor. And under his leadership, the church began broadcasting a weekly Sunday radio program called the Reclamation Hour. Members were involved in numerous neighborhood organizations and served on local, state, and national levels of Baptist organizations. The congregation grew, and a new home was needed once again. On September 24th, 1989, the congregation marched once again to a new home. Since that time, they have continued their community work in the Upper Buckeye neighborhood. Our historic structures are more than just bricks and mortar. It is the people that give them life, create memories, and cultivate significance. This property's significance lies in its association to the broad patterns of Cleveland's history, from immigration to the movement of ethnic cultures throughout our neighborhoods. The building maintains its integrity with minor changes to the steeple roof and the removal of stained glass windows. In speaking with the Catholic Diocese Archivist, I inquired about the location of the stained glass, as it was hoped that we might be able to reunite the stained glass with the building. Unfortunately, it was confirmed that most of the glass had been sold after the closing of the Orange Village Church. And we have some pictures from both exterior and interior. These are current conditions. And we are happy with this designation and excited in them celebrating 100+ years. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carl. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. Thank you for the information presented today. We will open it up to the committee for questions. Any questions from the committee? Councilman Jones?
I just want to say again, great production as it relates to the history. This is a huge facility. How big is the current congregation at the time?
I'm not the church clerk, so I'm a member of the church, but I'm not the church clerk, so I don't have those numbers. But I'm saying about 500, 400 or 500.
It's a really beautiful facility, and I saw some of the videos, of some of the performances in the church. Is making this a designation, are you looking to improve upon what you already have in terms of being able to get financing to help to maintain the church? It looks like it, from what I see right now, it seems like it's a great structure.
I think, yes. I think that's what the goal is. I know that right now we're involved in the community, and we had a school there for 10 years and things like that. And so becoming a landmark, I think, would help us to continue in the community and supporting that.
And it's so huge, Mr. Chairman, to the distinguished lady, it looks like you could have it as a high school almost. It looks so nice.
It was a school in there, and our goal is to open the school back up in there eventually.
Okay.
But right now it's open to the community for meetings and things like that.
Well, that would be nice if you do that, because I remember being a child, and back then the older blacks wanted to have charter systems, and at that time I was fighting with Fannie Lewis. I was a kid going to some of the meetings, and they wanted to have charter schools, and that generation of black people, unfortunately, they're no longer with us. Some of them, if they were alive, they'd be about 114, 120 years of age. And I can remember sitting in those meetings and talking about, because at that time we wanted to have a better educational system in the city of Cleveland for African Americans because of the continued discrimination in education in the 70s and 60s in the Cleveland public schools that led us up all the way up to the point of where we are in terms of mayoral control. But they wanted to have choice and options. Have you thought about maybe potentially in the future putting a charter school there?
That has not came up yet. And again, I'm not a trustee, so I'm not sure, but that has not came up in any of the meetings that I have heard. I do know that they're interested in opening up a school eventually.
Oh, that would be great.
Another school, because we already had a Christian Academy there for 10 years.
Oh, really good.
Yeah, we had a Christian Academy there. I think we served from the first or kindergarten up to the 12th.
And I think just, you could share this. This councilman is really concerned about our church's engagement and involvement back into the educational process. My kids went to Christian Academy when they were toddlers, and it helped to lay the foundation. And I think it's so important morally to reestablish some foundation back in our communities. And when we look at the state and condition, unfortunately, COVID changed a lot in people's value systems and morality. We even have politicians using abusive language, and we even have a party that's using abusive language of the likes that was conservative at one point and wrapped themselves around the Bible, now using language and speaking in ways that unfortunately we have never seen the likes of. So, I'm full support, Mr. Chairman, of this designation. I appreciate the work that the church is doing in the neighborhood, and I appreciate your commitment, and at least giving us some looks at it used to be a school, and then maybe potentially you're looking at doing that. And let me ask you this, because I know a lot of churches have food banks. Do you have a food bank too?
We do. we do. And I want to say that, just speaking, my children were raised and baptized at the church on 79th.
Okay.
Therefore, they have that connection. Where they come from or where they were, their religious background, they can go and see that. A lot of times in our neighborhood, those buildings are torn down. They're torn down, and no pictures, no reference to history. So that's why it's so important for us to try to keep the history of this, of our building.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here with us this morning.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. Thank you again, Mrs. Abernathy. Thank you, Brother Carlson. No further questions. Ordinance number 473-204 stands approved. All right.
Thank you.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
All right, DPS is adjourned.